I'm Kevin Shaw, and you're watching the Watercraft Journal.
Up and at 'em over an hour and a half before the sun was set to rise, I hitched up the trailer and drove to the Old Hickory Lock and Dam. Thankfully, I wasn't alone. Already half of our crew of 6 were in the parking lot strapping down extra fuel cans and packing gear and supplies. Most of us came with supercharged skis, like me aboard a 2021 Sea-Doo RX-PX 300, which meant extra fuel was going to be a must. With the plan to travel 400 miles today, we needed as much fuel as we could carry, and we still would be making several stops throughout the day. It wasn't even in the 40s yet, and the weather reports estimated that temperatures wouldn't break into the 50s. The Cumberland River looked cold and dark with a strong current, which would favor us for half the day and slow us down on our return route. With only so much daylight and a pretty big goal of 400 miles for the day ahead of us, we had to get moving at first light. With some wrangling, all of us were in the water by 6:30, all except one. BJ Doolittle, who drove up from Texas, had a heavily modified RX-TX 300. ECU issues had plagued him the day before, and the bug was still acting up. Dean Adler was scrambling to help him resolve it, but to no avail. We were burning precious daylight and had to go, so we ran back down the ramp, and we waved goodbye to BJ before speeding off southwest into the current.
All right, this is it. We're starting the ill-fated damn Tennessee ride. We got 5 of us here. We're starting about 15 minutes later than we wanted to, but that's all right. We should be in good shape. We're just making sure we get all of our stuff dialed in. We'll be checking in at the first stop in about 41 miles.
This portion of the Cumberland snakes through neighborhoods and farmland until you pass the Old Hickory paddle boat and towards Nashville. The first stop was Rock Harbor Marina, just west of Nashville's scenic downtown riverfront. The marina was closed this early in the morning, but thankfully its fuel dock is automated, allowing for 24-hour service. We splashed in a few gallons to top us off, since our next scheduled stop was another 100 miles downriver. Our route was pretty straightforward. We'd follow the Cumberland River into Lake Barkley, Kentucky, to the entrance of the lane between the lakes. That would set us right at the 200-mile mark, and where we'd have to turn right back around and head home. A few factors that could keep us from this goal had to be considered. First, we are only as fast as our slowest rider, so we had to maintain a minimum speed of 50 miles per hour. Second was fuel consumption. At a steady clip of 50 to 55 miles per hour, I calculated that the thirstiest of our group, which would be Chris Stone's 2020 Kawasaki Ultra 310X, would average about 4.5 miles per gallon, giving us a range of 100 miles with how much fuel we had on board. Spoiler warning, I was way off. To say that this ride had a rough start would be the understatement of the year. We had tried to host this ride nearly 2 years earlier, but a hurricane slamming into Louisiana and a global pandemic put an end to those plans. Deciding to make it a cold weather ride, the decision was to host it in February, but again, Mother Nature had other plans. A week's worth of torrential rainfall flooded the Tennessee River Valley to life-threatening levels, and local authorities shut off any river access. So we bumped it a month back to March 25th, with all but one of the riders backing out, that being Dean, who joined me on the first Panhandle ride back in October. Thankfully, another 4 daring adventurers took us up on the offer, and the ride was finally an official go. The cliffs of Ashland City crept up quickly, and the hills cast shadows over our group. Water conditions were glassy for the most part, all the way until Clarksville Lock and Dam. It took a phone call to alert the lockmaster, as yanking the rope didn't signal our arrival like normal. Doug May Young from Lexington, Kentucky, was having a tough time. While his SVHO-powered GP 1800R was getting the best fuel consumption of all of us, he had forgotten his snowboarding pants and was riding out all day in a pair of board shorts. At nearly 2 hours into our ride, Doug's legs were bright purple from the cold and wind. RJ Whitford, on the other hand, came down from Minnesota far more equipped than any of us. The center storage bin of his Sea-Doo GTX was packed to the gills, and if you happened to need something, RJ likely had it, if not 2 of them. Locking through Clarksville Dam didn't take more than half an hour, and soon we were on our way through Clarksville's bending riverfront. Barge traffic soon became a bit of an issue as we navigated past tugs pushing low-slung barges heavy with sand and rock. Catching one tug's wake a little too fast, the RXPX caught a foot of air before coming down hard and knocking a GoPro loose. Despite being wrapped in a bright orange float, the GoPro sank to the river's bottom in seconds, losing us precious footage from our ride thus far. And this came not long after my cell phone mount had broken loose, forcing me to tuck my phone away in the glove box for the rest of the ride.
All right, we are stopping to refuel. We're using up some jerry cans. Doug's doing good with the auxiliary tank in the back. Chris is doing a little bit of a top off on the Cowie. Sea-Doo is eating up a lot more fuel than I was expecting. And I managed to lose a GoPro, which had a whole lot of footage on there. So I'm gonna try to cram more footage onto this one.
After a brief stop to fill up our skis' fuel tanks with our jerry cans, we took a quick assessment of everyone's fuel levels and recalculated our fuel range on the GPS. It turns out that Chris's Ultra was inhaling fuel closer to 3.5 miles per gallon and needed to borrow a few gallons from RJ just to keep going. The realization came to me that we were simply not going to make it to Lake Barkley Marina with the fuel we had. Amazingly, this revelation came as we were less than a mile away from a solitary fuel dock slightly inland. We limped into Bumpus Mills Marina and were met by its attendee, quite surprised to see 5 jet skis idling in on such a cold, overcast morning. We topped off just enough to get us safely into Lake Barkley Marina, where we'd mark as our turnaround point. Having to reduce our clip to 45 miles per hour and making extra fuel stops simply ate too much of our daylight. It was clear that we weren't going to make it to land between the lakes and make it back before nightfall. And as we sped into Lake Barkley, the northerly wind whipped up the water into sporadic whitecaps. Aboard the RXPX, I had little trouble sluicing through the chop, but the others didn't fare so well. We ended up scrubbing off precious speed, making the going a lot slower. We limped into Lake Barkley Marina and began topping off our tanks and jerry cans. Selling only low-grade fuel, we blended in several bottles of fuel additive to help supplement the reduced octane. This isn't ideal, especially over an extended period of time, but seeing that we were going to be burning through all of this fuel before the end of the day, it worked as a decent band-aid. The teenage boys attending the pumps were flabbergasted at what we were attempting to accomplish. We had racked up just over 170 miles and were ready to turn back around and head upstream. Changing our direction 180 degrees also meant that we were navigating the wind-blown chop backwards from how we came in. Adding to the challenge, Lake Barkley was milky brown with rain runoff and debris, requiring us to be extra vigilant to avoid sucking up any detritus. Charging into the wind and spray, a few hard impacts jostled the mount from my Garmin GPS loose. With reflexes well beyond my own, I lurched forward and snatched the GPS before it too slipped under the water. My homemade mounts were 0-3. After some pounding, we slipped back into the shelter of the Cumberland River and some smooth water. Not only were we running against the current, but also into a headwind, which meant we were burning much more gas at a faster speed. Thankfully, Clarksville Marina, a little over 80 miles upriver, had opened its doors that morning, just a couple hours after we had passed in the opposite direction. This meant that we didn't have to concern ourselves with stretching out our fuel range like we had it earlier. With 12 gallons on the RXPX's transom thoroughly strapped down to a cool PWC rack fitted with Sea-Doo link brackets, and an extra 2.5 gallons up front, I was carrying plenty of fuel to allow us to speed back up to 55 miles an hour. Dean and Doug kept up the pace as well, with RJ and Chris trailing closely behind. We had encountered a couple of rough patches and slipped past a half a dozen barges, but for the most part, encountered relatively smooth conditions as we streaked through the Cumberland River Valley. Stopping to regroup, we poured the rest of our fuel into our skis tanks before reaching Clarksville. The Garmin showed that we weren't more than 15 miles away, so it wouldn't take much to get us into safe harbor. We raced towards downtown Clarksville, passing under the stone bridge and into the marina. Each of us repeated the process of pouring in a bottle of octane booster prior to filling up on 87 octane fuel. The blend wouldn't push the low-grade fuel above 90 octane, but it would keep the knock sensors in our 4-stroke engines from heavily retarding our ignition curves, robbing us of power, and worsening our already miserable fuel mileage all the way home. Pulling out of the marina, it was another 20 minutes before we reached the lock. Another quick phone call to the lockmaster and the gates were opened. Another 20 minutes later, we were idling out of the dam, thanking the lockmaster for the quick passage. And like that, we were off again, racing towards Nashville. Boat traffic picked up as we neared Rock Harbor, but as we topped off not too long ago, we skipped the final fuel stop before reaching the Old Hickory Dam launch ramp. Shortly after passing through downtown, much to the amazement of the lookers-on, we circled up again one last time. Dean inquired whether we needed to dip into our jerry cans. Confirming with the GPS, I said it was close enough for us to make it, even with the low fuel alarms blaring. With the final few curves of the Cumberland River remaining before we reached the dam, we watched as our fuel gauges crept lower and lower. We all had far more than enough emergency fuel left in our cans to take us the rest of the way, but none of us wanted to stop. We had been out for over 11 hours and we were just really tired. The bars on the Sea-Doo's fuel gauge continued to disappear, but the dam was still too far away. 2 bars left. I kept the speed control set at 60 miles per hour. Sure, I was spending more gas than necessary, but I was so close. 1 bar left. The dam was just around the coming bend, right? The GPS wasn't wrong, I knew it. But I kept the throttle pinned anyhow. Chris on his orange Kawasaki wasn't far behind, with the long hauler fuel kit he had bought from us automatically feeding the fuel tank extra gasoline. 0 bars left. The alarm was pinging continuously. I've never ran a watercraft dry before. I'm pretty sure this is bad for the intake fuel pump, I thought. And there it was, Old Hickory Dam. I squeezed the throttle a little tighter and pulled up to the muddy bank near the ramp, killing the throttle and letting it coast up to the shore with a wet thump.
Holy cow. Completely empty. 0 bars. 0 fuel. But we made it. I can't believe it.
Although short of our 400-mile goal, we had traversed 343 miles in just under 12 hours despite frigid air temps, blistering 20-mile-per-hour gusts, and patches of frankly teeth-jarring chop. Personally, I find it humorous when I see guys boasting, I ride 365 days a year online, but you only see them out when the water conditions and temperatures are favorable. It really says something when you're willing to charge harder and longer than anybody else when it's ugly out there. And those are the kind of guys that I want to ride with.
You've been watching the Watercraft Journal. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a like, leave a comment, and share it with your friends. It's definitely going to help us grow the channel. And if you like more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel because we update videos every day, Sunday through Friday, entirely free to you. Moreover, we even publish new articles at watercraftjournal.com. That's www.watercraftjournal.com, where new articles are published every single day, Monday through Friday, entirely subscription free to you. So make sure you check it out, and we'll see you soon.